Okay, then we're going to begin, and people might also join during the session. So my name is Anda Catalina Kelba. I'm working as a cloud engineer at Amonok Solutions. I have a developer background, and today I'm working as a consultant in order to help my clients and support them in their cloud journey. So as you might already seen, if you have a question, you can write it into the chat. So let me know if there are any issues with voice or video or lagging during the session. This session is recorded and will be made available during the week. And let's get started. I want to give you just a brief overview of Amonok Solutions. So we are an IT solution provider. We focus on enterprise cloud data center solutions. We operate throughout Switzerland with headquarters in Bern. So our customers include medium-sized companies, enterprise, and service providers that are spread across all industries. And we are a subsidiary of the listed S&T group that is headquartered in Austria, in Linz. So this is an overview of what we're going to talk about today. So as you can see, there are different topics we're going to discuss during this session that will last 1 hour. And the goal is to give you a basis when it comes to security while using AWS. So why would you use a cloud infrastructure for a project? Maybe this is one question for you, or maybe you're already using AWS services or another cloud provider services. But here I wanted to highlight some reasons of why using a cloud infrastructure. So in a cloud computing environment, new IT resources are only a click away, which means that you reduce the time to make those resources available to your developers from weeks to just minutes. So this allows you to dramatically increase in agility inside the organization, since the cost and time it takes to experiment and develop is significantly lower. So secondly, it eliminates guessing on your infrastructure capacity needs. When you make a capacity decision prior to deploying an application, you often end up either sitting on expensive idle resources or dealing with limited capacity. So with cloud computing, these problems goes away and you can access as much or as little capacity as you need and scale up and down as required with only a few minutes notice. So this is quite interesting actually. If you never played around with a cloud provider services, you can just go try it and see by yourself directly the result. So thirdly, when using cloud computing, you can actually achieve a lower variable cost than you can get on your own. So this is because usage from hundreds of thousands of customers is aggregated in the cloud, and providers such as AWS can achieve higher economies of scale, which translates into lower pay-as-you-go prices. We are going to talk a little bit more about pay-as-you-go model in the next slide. And lastly, you can easily deploy your application in multiple regions around the world with just a few clicks. This means you can provide lower latency and a better experience for your customers at a minimal cost. So this is an overview of a cloud infrastructure benefits. So it's something you might already experienced or you may experience if you plan to try them by your own. So when we using AWS services, there are different pricing models. Pay as you go. You can save when you reserve money, and actually you can pay less when you use more. So pay as you go allows you to easily adapt to changing business needs without overcommitting budgets and improving the way you react to changes. So with a pay-as-you-go model, you can quickly adapt your business depending on the needs and not on the forecasts. And this allows you to reduce the risk of over-positioning or missing capacity. Then you can actually reserve resources and pay a lower price. There are certain services like Amazon EC2 that are the instances, the servers, and for example, a managed database service, Amazon RDS, where you can invest in reserved capacity. And you can save up to 75% over equivalent on-demand capacity. So the larger the upfront payment, the greater the discount. And lastly, so with AWS, you can get volume-based discounts and realize important savings as your usage increases. And what AWS does, well, they sell IT services that are around infrastructure as a service, or platform as a service, or software as a service. Here is an overview of the AWS global infrastructure, where we can see the different regions all around the world. So the global infrastructure is composed of regions, availability zones, and points of presence, which consists of edge locations and regional edge cache servers. So here you can see names of cities that are the names of the regions. A region is a physical location around the world where they cluster data center, and they are steadily expanding their global infrastructure in order to achieve lower latency and higher throughput. Let's now have a closer look at the Europe's region. So today we have 6 regions available in Europe and 2 new regions coming. So the big announcement for us, as you can see, in Switzerland, we're going to have a Swiss region at Zurich. So it should be available during the second half of 2022. So 2 years from now, we should hear more about new Swiss projects using this new data center. Now let's see what do we have inside the region. Each AWS region consists of multiple isolated and physically separated availability zones within a geographic area. So each availability zone, or we used also to call them AZ, so has independent power cooling, and physical security, and is connected via redundant ultra-low latency network. So in order to achieve greater fault tolerance, it is recommended to focus on high availability by designing the applications to run in multiple availability zones. So this is an important point to keep in mind when you're starting to design your project. Next, we're going to get into security and compliance. So security and compliance is a shared responsibility between AWS and the customer or the user. So they have a shared responsibility model where AWS manages and controls the components from the host, operating system, and virtualization layer down to the physical security of the facilities in which the services operate, and AWS customers are responsible for building secure applications. So this is often represented as AWS is responsible for security of the cloud, while customers are responsible for security in the cloud. So when we talk about security and compliance, we always start by having a look at the responsibility model. So let's see a high level overview of this model. So in orange would be the part where AWS is responsible for the global infrastructure that runs all the services offered in the AWS cloud. So the infrastructure comprises hardware, software, networking, and facilitates that run AWS services, facilities. So, and then as an AWS customer, you can securely provision virtual servers, storage, databases, and desktops in the AWS cloud. So in this process, it's important to understand that you are responsible for securing your data, operating systems, the networks, platforms, and other resources that you create in the AWS cloud. So you are responsible for protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data in the cloud, and for meeting any specific business and/or compliance requirements for your workloads in the cloud. It is also important to note that the shared responsibilities vary depending on the type of AWS services that are being used. So in the next slides, we will take a closer look at this model for various AWS services so that you can better understand it. But first, I want to highlight here the importance of the fact that you own and control your data, even for the AWS Foundation services, where AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud. So taking a look at some examples and starting with container services. So for AWS container services, AWS manages the underlying infrastructure and foundation services, the operating system, and the application platform. For example, a service called Amazon RDS for Oracle is a managed database service with which AWS manages all the layers of the container, including the Oracle database platform. So for services such as RDS, the AWS platform provides data backup and recovery tools. But it is your responsibility to configure and use tools in relation to your business continuity and disaster recovery policy. it is important to note that for services failing into this category, users may not have root access to the instances, the underlying operating system, or the application platform. Next, we'll look at the AWS Abstract Services, where you are responsible for managing your data, including classifying your assets, and for using identity access management tools to apply permissions to individual resources at the platform level or permission based on user identity or user responsibility at different levels. So there are some services such as Amazon S3, that is an object storage service, where you can also use platform provided encryption of data at rest or platform provided HTTPS encapsulation for your payloads to protect your data in transit to and from the service. So that would be an overview of the responsibility model. I see that for now there are no questions, so we can move forward. Let's now talk about some perceptions. I invite you to take a minute and reflect on this. What are your perceptions on cloud security? You might express them in the chat. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some examples of perceptions. And so, okay. One would be that we don't use services that lock us in. This is a subject of discussion that is pretty common when talking about cloud services. We can have that the public cloud is not secure, or we don't give away our data, or we also imagine sometimes there are cases when we think that our data cannot leave the country and should stay in the country. So the goal here is to see together how do we reply to these inquiries during the session. First of all, it's important to understand that the word public, what the word public means when we talk about public cloud. So there are services that can be used by everybody on the globe with an internet connection and a credit card. That's all you need in the end. Secondly, the data in AWS that you store is yours. So you have the ownership of your data and decide what to do with it and how to secure its access. The role of AWS is to make sure that the privacy of your data is respected. So this is done through strict controls, third-party audits. I provide you here with a link where you can go and check more information about data center security. Yeah, we have a comment in the chat, and we are going to at the very end to talk a little bit about the FINMA, the Swiss Finance Regulatory Authority. And yeah, nice. Also, you might wonder maybe where the next data center in Switzerland will be located. Well, officially, we don't have the information of the data center locations. And this is for security reasons. So there is a white paper offering more comprehensive information on security process. So I put in here the link. This is an overview that has almost 100 pages and answers specific questions that you might have. So it's very complete, and I encourage you to go have a look if you're more interested in how the security processes are handled. Can you hear me now or still not? So I think there is indeed something about 20 seconds lag. So I checked my mic. It looks good. I shall continue, and please let me know if there are still any troubles in hearing me. So let's now abord the lock-in subject. The term lock-in, I think it might be misleading. Talking about switching costs would be more appropriate. I think you agree with me that switching costs have existed throughout the history of IT. So as soon as you commit yourself to a platform or a vendor, you'll have switching costs if you later decide to change. So for example, if you choose Java and then migrate to Node.js, which are two programming languages, you'll have a cost. If you choose Maven and then migrate to Gradle, you'll have a cost. If you decide on a mainframe and then move to horizontally scalable commodity hardware, it will cost you something. So in none of these cases, you are actually locked in. You simply have switching costs, which may be large or small depending on the situation. Something you might consider is having two alternatives. So let's say that we consider choosing to use Oracle as a database for a given application. To mitigate the lock-in, we might also consider to build the application on SQL Server. The costs of having two alternative databases for the same application might outweigh the benefits in risk management. But in the end, if you decide that this is the right way for you to do it, well, just go for it. So during your analysis of switching, you might ask yourself some questions. What will my switching costs look like if I need to leave AWS? What is the likelihood of that occurring? And how can I cost effectively reduce those risks? One benefit of cloud services is that you pay as you go, with a few exceptions like the reserved instances, as we saw. But if you choose to pay as you go at the beginning, you are leaving no money on the table if you decide to switch providers. Another thing to mitigate your potential switching costs is through a good architecture, standard practices, standard deployment practices, some pre-planning. So all of this can help you to mitigate the switching costs. So I provide you with a link of a blog article that gives a better explanation and feedback of switching costs. So if you are looking to enlarge your perspectives, so I highly encourage you to read this article, and I think it's a good next step. Now, I want to offer you an idea of the available security services in AWS. So we are not going to go deep. We are just going to have a look at the different categories of services so that you can see by yourself that there is quite a spectrum of services you can choose to use from. Thank you for your feedback. You can hear me. So AWS Identity Services allow your identity administrators to create users directly in AWS or to connect to an existing identity source. So directly in AWS, you can use AWS Identity and Access Management. So this enables you to manage access to AWS services and resources securely. So you can create and manage AWS users and groups and use permissions to allow and deny their access to AWS resources. Or you can connect to the existing identity source that you might already have. For example, the AWS Directory Service, it's a managed Microsoft Active Directory. So you just need to choose what best suits your needs. Then you can gain visibility on what's happening behind by using services like CloudTrail, CloudWatch, or Config. So with CloudTrail, you can log, continuously monitor, and retain account activity related to actions across your AWS infrastructure. With CloudWatch, you can collect monitoring and operational data in the form of logs, metrics, and events, providing you with a unified view of AWS resources, applications, and services that run on AWS and maybe also on-premises services, servers if you're using. And if you want to have an AWS resource inventory, you can use Config. That's a fully managed service. Provides you with the resource inventory, configuration history, and also configuration change notifications to enable security and governance. So in AWS, you can implement detective controls by processing logs, events, and monitoring that allows for auditing, automated analysis, and alarming. For example, here, Amazon Guard Duty is a managed threat detection service that continuously monitors for malicious or unauthorized behavior to help you protect your AWS accounts and workloads. Infrastructure protection is also a key part of an information security program. So it ensures that systems and services within your workload are protected against unintended and unauthorized access, potential vulnerabilities. One service that can help you here is Amazon Inspector. It automatically assesses applications for exposure, vulnerabilities, and deviations from best practices. And last but not least, data protection through encryption. So know that you can bring your own keys and manage them or create your keys in AWS. AWS Key Management Service, as its name already says, it's the service that enables you to do so. So you can manage your secrets, your certificates. Amazon Macy here is a fully managed data security and data privacy service that uses machine learning and pattern matching to discover and protect your sensitive data in AWS. So as you can see, there are different services you can choose from depending on your needs. So let's now have a look at how you could, for example, mitigate DDoS attacks. So a combination of AWS services can be used to do so. So these services are designed with an automatic response to DDoS attacks and can help minimize times to mitigate and reduce impact. When we saw the infrastructure, the global AWS infrastructure, I mentioned that AWS has edge locations. So AWS edge locations, they provide you actually with an additional layer of networking infrastructure, and they increase the ability of absorbing DDoS attacks and isolating faults while minimizing availability impact. So with the services listed here, you can create a flexible layered security perimeter against multiple types of denial of service attacks. So they all reside, the 4 services reside at AWS Edge and provide a scalable, reliable, and high-performance security perimeter for your applications and content. So, as you can see, a lot of services, security services available on AWS. What I want next is to take an example of usual security threats in order to have a more concrete understanding. So if we look at something like securing S3 buckets, which is the object storage service, AWS provides actually a plethora of ways to ensure that you secure your bucket. So from blocking any bucket from being public to access control lists and encryption on buckets or files. You can lock down the buckets as necessary. But sometimes mistakes happen. So AWS have also built services to help identify when something went wrong. So for example, Amazon Macy can tell you when you have sensitive data open to the world, and AWS config can tell you when the change was made and by whom. A second example could be for your application development efforts. Let's say that a developer may accidentally leave some test credentials in a package that they've posted, let's say, on GitHub without checking it with AWS secrets. Well, if those credentials get stolen, services like GuardDuty can alert you and on a bad or weird behavior, let's say, and give you a chance to take action. So even when it's your part of the shared responsibility model, as we can see the security in the cloud, AWS still provide tools and resources to help keep the data safe. Let's now see together how AWS supports you in achieving data security. So we talked about services and we're moving forward. To, let's say, AWS Compliance. So AWS regularly achieves third-party validation for thousands of global compliance requirements that they continually monitor to help you meet security and compliance standards for finance, retail, healthcare, government, and beyond. So whether it's about, so let's say, SOC auditors providing details on AWS control implementation, or federal governments like the US and Australia accrediting AWS services, or certifications towards industry standards like PCI or HIPAA, AWS often has the compliance you need to build your workloads on a secure foundation. Know that a more extensive list is available on the AWS website, so please check it as soon as you start compliance discussions. So when talking about compliance, while making use of AWS services, as I already stated, the discussion always starts with the AWS Shared Responsibility Model. So keep in mind that not just because AWS has these certifications does mean you will automatically be accredited as well. Applications built on top of AWS services are not implicitly compliant to security controls that AWS services are compliant with. So as a customer, you need to certify applications separately by engaging with external auditors. There are also a number of reports that attest AWS controls on their side of the shared responsibility model. So for example, if you need to pass along the controls for data center access, you can leverage the AWS SOC 2 report from AWS Artifact. So SOC 2 would be the System and Organization Controls 2 report that provide customers and users with a business need with an independent assessment of AWS control environment relevant to system security, availability, and confidentiality. So there are over 50 different reports spanning global compliance. You should be able to find the control you and your auditors care about. So this is available in AWS Artifact at no cost. It's a self-service portal, and you can get the AWS compliance reports on demand. So it's important to keep in mind your data responsibilities as a customer. So you own your data and you control the access to your data. You're responsible to audit the access. You can encrypt it. You're responsible on the control of business continuity, and as we stated at the beginning, multi-availability zone design. It's to be considered. And AWS is responsible for availability and durability of your data. You might wonder, okay, I have my data in AWS, and who can access my data? How can I know this? To answer this question, there are different services that can help you. So there are AWS Identity and Access Management Access Analyzer that makes it simple for you to check that the policies provide only the intended access to resources. You also have the access analyzer, for example, for Amazon S3, the object storage service. When you're going to enable it, it is going, the access analyzer for S3 will automatically be visible in the S3 management console. And of course, you have the different detective control services. Some of them we already saw them in the previous slides. So all these services are here to support you and help you answer the question, who can access my data? Let's now talk about a security principle that is called principle of least privilege. So in AWS, the concept of least privilege means that you give users the least amount of access and responsibility necessary to complete their duties. So when you create identity access management policies, follow the standard security advice of granting least privilege or granting only the permissions required to perform a task. So you should determine what users need to do and then craft the policies that allow them to perform only those tasks. So you can start with a minimum set of permissions and grant additional permissions as necessary. Doing so, it's more secure than starting with permissions that are too lenient and then trying to tighten them later. I am quickly checking to see if there are questions in the chat. No questions so far. So now we're going to have a look at some laws and regulations. So this will give you useful information and you should considering it as a starting point. So two of the important Swiss laws are the Federal Act on Data Protection and the Federal Act on Banks and Savings Banks. Today, we'll have a look at the Federal Act on Data Protection Basic Requests, GDPR, Cloud Act, and FINMA Circular. For the Swiss laws, I also provided the names in the different official Swiss languages. So you might know them in French or in German or in Italian. So maybe they already mean something to you. So when talking about the Federal Act on data protection, it's worth to know that it allows storing personal data outside of Switzerland. Let's say that you decide to store personal data in Germany. What you need to check is that Germany's data protection regulations are at the same level or greater than Switzerland. So to check this, you may go and have a look at the approved list of countries by Switzerland. I provided here the list that was published in 2017. What is going to be interesting starting with 2022 is that it's going to be possible to store personal data in AWS Swiss data center. So meanwhile, and even after the Zurich regions will become available, I consider this information to be important for the strategic business decisions. GDPR. So you might have already heard about it and maybe you even needed to go into details. GDPR stands for European Union's General Data Protection Regulation. So it came out in 2018, replacing the existing EU Data Protection Directive. And its goal is to harmonize data protection laws throughout the European Union by applying a single data protection law that is binding throughout each member state. But you might say, okay, this is for EU, I'm in Switzerland, should I be GDPR compliant? If you process or are planning to process personal data of data subjects in the European Union, then the answer is yes. So GDPR applies to all organizations established in the EU and to organizations whether or not established in the EU that process the personal data of the European Union data subjects in connection with either the offering of goods or services to data subjects in the European Union or the monitoring of behavior that takes place within the European Union. So I hope that example was clear for you. And maybe you wonder what we consider personal data. So personal data is any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. Let's see what you'll need to consider if you decide to transfer content that includes personal data. So if you operate in the European Economic Area and collect personal data from the users on your website, let's say, and then you use a third-party processor to handle some aspect of your business strategy, you would want to know that the data processor is operating within GDPR compliance and doing what they should be doing with the important data of your users. So there are agreements done, and they are intended to ensure that each entity is operating in compliance with the GDPR if concerns the European Economic Area or other applicable privacy laws as the European Union US Privacy Shield Framework or the Swiss US Privacy Shield Framework. And these agreements are here in order to protect the interests of different parties. So, as you might have already guessed, there is indeed a white paper that can help you achieve GDPR compliancy. So it gives you information over how to deal with the data access controls, monitoring and logging, to protect their data in order to be GDPR compliant. You have the link here and you might access it if you're interested for further information. Let's now talk about Cloud Act. So Cloud Act actually is not about cloud like cloud services. Cloud means clarifying lawful overseas use of data act. And one of the most common misunderstandings about the Cloud Act is that it is applicable to only US companies. And this is not true. So the Cloud Act applies to all electronic communication service or remote computing service providers that are subject to US jurisdiction including email providers, telecom companies, social media sites, and cloud providers, whether they are established in the United States or in another country. So this means that any foreign company with an office or subsidiary in the United States is subject to the Cloud Act. And by using the AWS services, we are also concerned. So Cloud Act would be similar to the cybercrime convention that is used in Switzerland. In case of a warrant issued by the United States courts, AWS has the right to challenge the request. So if the request concerns a non-US person, then the cloud doesn't apply. And also if there are no conflicts with local laws, AWS they can reject the request to provide more information. And one way to highly protect your content is to encrypt your data in transit and at rest with your own keys. So I think this is something to consider and to bear in mind. More information about Cloud Act and AWS, you can find it on the provided link. And next, you might wonder how Amazon handles requests from foreign authorities. What it's important to know is that they do not disclose customer information in response to government demands unless they are required to do so to comply with a legally valid and binding order. Unless prohibited from doing so, or if there is a clear indication of illegal conduct in connection with the use of the products or services, Amazon, they first notify the customers before disclosing content information. So if it's the case, you'll first get a notification. Remember, if you use encryption and you have your own keys, then you'll need, for example, to further collaborate with the US government in order to decrypt the data so that they can read it. But before going there and being in that step, your data is encrypted and they cannot read it. And the AWS doesn't have the encryption key in order to provide them. Here is also a link at the bottom of the slide where you can see the number of requests that they get and the number of responses that they offer in order to have an idea. And last, I think what we're talking about is the FINMA. So the Swiss Financial Market Supervisor Authority that supervises banks, insurance companies, and other financial entities in Switzerland. So they published a circular in 218, outsourcing with requirements for banks, security dealers, and insurance companies that outsource functions that are material for their business. Here you are encouraged. So if you are a financial institution customer, You are encouraged to obtain appropriate advice on the compliance with all regulatory and legal requirements that are relevant to your business. So including the FINMA circulars, relevant guidelines like the Swiss Bankers Associations and the laws. So this is a subject when you would normally take the share responsibility model, and then you will see each service, how it complies with the relevant laws, and go through it one by one in order to achieve your compliance requirements. So for more information here, I highly encourage you to contact your AWS account manager if you have one, or to reach out to AWS or security partners. So we are now close to the end of this session. And I want to leave you with some highlights of our today's session. So remember, archive your data and do regularly backups for compliance requirements. Please encrypt your data if possible, if your own encryption keys. Encrypt it at rest, encrypt it in transit. Think about automating security operations. So in Switzerland, depending on the sector and more often the case, you are free to use the cloud, and also the cloud services from providers are abroad. Personal data, so it's allowed to be stored outside Switzerland. In European countries, as we saw, there is usually no problem. And all AWS services can be used in compliance with the GDPR. So I'm going to see if there are some questions. So the EU-US and Swiss-US privacy shield are no longer valid. Okay, thanks for the information. I will check that after the session. Thanks for sharing.